Welcome back to the Catching Made Simple podcast. This is episode 3, and we're talking about what is the most important skill as a catcher by the numbers, and it's not what you think. All right, if you don't know who I am, my name's Anj Bourgeois, and I'm the founder of Catching Made Simple. The reason I make these videos is because I transitioned from an infielder to a catcher my junior year of college, and I wish I had this information when I first started. So let's jump in. Now, one of the big things that we talked about in the last episode is the mismeasurement of catching. And really, where one of the big things of mismeasurement happens is in the pop time. So I made a short video. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But it's called Why the Pop Time is Not as Important as You Think. And it starts off by saying, I used to think that the pop time was the most important thing as a catcher, but now I know it's actually the least important. And how we want to think about this is we want to think about what happens the most amount of times in a game. As we continue to dive into it, right, what we're gonna find is the pop time, actually throwing someone out or throwing to a base, happens actually a very few amount of times in each game. And what happens much more often is blocking and throwing and getting into a stance. Now, does that mean that just because it only happens a few times that we shouldn't practice it? No, not at all. That's why tag plays and plays at the plate and cuts and relays are so important, is because when they happen, they're really high stakes situations and we need to be able to execute on them. In reality, the things that we should be spending the most time practicing on are the things that are happening the most in the game. So if I had to ask you, and you had to answer, how many times do you throw down to a base? How many times do you try to throw a runner out in a game? I've asked a ton of catchers this, and normally I get anywhere from 3 to 5, maybe 8 max, right? Never even really 10. And then if I ask you, hey, how many times do you block a pitch in a game? That number really depends again, but generally it's in a range of at least 5 times, at max 30 times. I heard 50 once. I think that might be a little much, but maybe at the younger ages, right? So again, maybe like 3 to 8 times throwing, 10 to 30 times blocking. Then how many times do you receive? Again, that also depends on how long of a game you're playing, basically what age you're at. But roughly, you could say about 150 pitches in a game, right? And that's not including warm-ups or pregame or anything like that. So what you're gonna find is that throwing actually happens the least amount of time, but oftentimes we attribute the most importance to that, even though we do it the least amount of times. And then the thing that I like to take it back to as well is, how many times do you get into a stance? Now, if you count the sign stance as one stance, and then you count your primary or secondary or single knee or modified kickstand as another stance, then it's gonna be at least double receiving, so at least 300 times, right? But here's the thing, when we look at the practice time that we have, that most catchers get, it's really focused on throwing. They don't really spend any time at all on the stance, which is arguably the most important and foundational piece to catching, because a bad stance makes everything harder, a good stance makes everything easier, so we should be spending time on that. And we don't really give any attention to the stance, right? We don't spend that much time on receiving, probably because we don't know how to teach it, and then we don't really spend that much time on blocking. If you look at where the data in the MLB is going, they're continuing to optimize more and more for receiving first and blocking second and throwing third. That's why you see single knee stances with runners on, even with runners in scoring position. And the reality is the most important thing is receiving, because the influence that the difference of a 2-1 count versus a 1-2 count has. So receiving truly is the most important. So when we think about how we allocate our practice time, we want to make sure that we're spending a proportionate amount of time practicing the things to how often we'll do it in the game, right? So we want to be spending a lot of time on our stances, especially if they're not good. If they're good, then we can move on to the different skills. But in our stances, then we want to be spending time on receiving, and then blocking, and then throwing. And then on top of that, then all our specialty plays, right? Bunt plays, cuts and relays, plays at the plate, wild pitches, how do you slide and throw back to the pitcher, and right, those are the fun ones. But we really want to make sure that the time that we spend practicing. If you're a coach and you're writing out a practice plan, spend time making sure that they work on the right things that are really the most important things. One more note on this. If you look at highlight tapes, so like if you go into YouTube or Google and you search Yadier Molina highlight tapes, what you're gonna see is a bunch of highlights of Yadier Molina throwing runners out. There might be a few bump plays or catcher pops, and the reason why is because those are kind of the sexy things of catching, right? Those are exciting. That's what gets the cheer from the crowd. But if you really want to win, if you really want to be a great catcher, it's about doing the boring, less sexy things really, really well. And so that's what I would encourage you, right? Whether you're a player or a parent or a coach, get the fundamentals right first, and then we can spend some time working on the more fun, sexy things. But you have to earn the right to work on those things. And if you haven't mastered how to get into a good stance, or how to receive effectively, or how to block effectively, then you really shouldn't be spending time on throwing and catcher pops and all the other stuff until you at least have a solid foundation there. If you want to develop, right? If you just want to have some fun, then yeah, go and do the fun stuff, right? Because that's what it is, it's fun. But if you really want to be great, the path to greatness is by doing the more boring, fundamental things exceptionally well. I'll finish with one more story. John Wooden, one of my heroes, was the basketball coach for UCLA, and he won 10 national championships, arguably one of the greatest coaches of all time. And one of the things that he says is that his national championship college basketball team players did the same drills as 14-year-old basketball players who did the same drills as 7-year-old basketball players. Now, what's the difference there? The difference is not the drill itself. The difference is the attention to detail in the drill. So Yadier Molina is doing the same drills as you as a catcher, but he just does them so much better, with so much more precision, with so much more attention to detail. And so don't get distracted by the sexy stuff, right? Look at how many times things actually happen in the game. Work on the things that will happen the most and dominate there. Be the best in the world at those things, and then earn the right to also be the best in the world at the more fun, sexy stuff. But if you're a beginning player, you need to get into a good stance first. If you're an advanced high school player, you need to make sure you have an incredible stance, that you are elite at receiving, that you are elite at blocking, and then we can talk about throwing. We can talk about the other stuff. But get the fundamentals right first, and that is going to be your best path to success. Okay, if you haven't taken the 7-day stance challenge, I'd highly recommend it. Go to catchingmadesimple.com/stance, and you get a 5-minute video a day with teaching on a stance and a mobility drill that you can do at home. You're going to walk out of that with at least a better understanding of what a good stance is, what some of the common problems of different stances are, and how to get your hips more flexible so that you can actually get into a good stance. All right, so that's what I got. Thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm Anj Bourgeois with Catching Made Simple. I'm excited to see you around. We'll see you soon.